On the 15th of March, 1975, a man lay dying in a private room at the American hospital in Neuilly-sur-Seine, outside Paris. His eyelids had been taped shut because the muscles that held them open had stopped working months earlier. His weight had dropped below 100 pounds. His daughter sat beside the bed. His wife was in New York. She had been informed. She reportedly went shopping on Madison Avenue. The man in that room had once owned the largest privately held shipping fleet in the Western world. More than 100 vessels, a national airline, a private island in the Ionian Sea, and a yacht with gold-plated bathroom fixtures. He weighed less than his youngest grandchild would weigh at birth. His name was Aristotle Onassis, and nearly everything he built was consumed by the people he loved and the grief he could not outlast. He bought a Canadian warship for $34,000 and turned it into the most famous private yacht on Earth. He married the widow of an assassinated American president. He employed a former financial architect of the Third Reich to negotiate an oil deal with the King of Saudi Arabia. He cleared $70 million in a single year during the Suez Crisis, the equivalent of over $700 million today. These facts sound invented. They are not. One son would die at 24 in a plane crash at an Athens airport. One daughter would inherit an empire she never wanted and die alone in a bathtub in Buenos Aires at 37. And in 1971, the man who had built all of it would watch his ex-wife marry his greatest rival, the same man accused of fatally injuring her own sister. This is the story of how a man built one of the greatest private fortunes of the 20th century and lost every meaningful thing it was supposed to buy: his son, his health, and eventually the empire itself, dismantled within a generation by heirs who could not hold it. If you stay with this one, I think you will find it is one of the strangest inheritance stories ever recorded. I will ask only one thing. Subscribe if this is the kind of history you come here for. Your support genuinely makes these possible. All right, let us get into it. It begins with a ship, a Canadian frigate rusting in a surplus yard, waiting to be cut for scrap. She was built in 1943 by Canadian Vickers in Montreal, launched under the name Mick Stormont, a river-class anti-submarine frigate commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy during the Battle of the Atlantic. She escorted convoys through U-boat waters. She was present at the Normandy landings on the 6th of June, 1944. She assisted the damaged Mex Matane into Plymouth Harbour. She escorted Arctic convoys to Murmansk through some of the most dangerous waters in the Northern Hemisphere. When the war ended and the fleet contracted, the Canadian Navy listed her as surplus and offered her at scrap value. In 1954, Aristotle Onassis bought her for $34,000, the price of a modest suburban house. In today's currency, that would be equivalent to roughly $380,000. He then spent $4 million converting her into a private yacht at the Howeltzwerke shipyard in Kiel, Germany, a sum equivalent to approximately $50 million today. The architect Saar Pinnau redesigned both the bow and stern. The interior designer Apostolos Melindris fitted her with wood sourced from the Greek islands, blue cyan marble bathrooms, and gold-plated fixtures in every one of her 17 suites. Onassis named her after his daughter Christina. The Christina measured 325 feet from bow to stern, displaced 1,802 gross tons, and carried a permanent crew of 60. The swimming pool on the aft deck featured a mosaic floor depicting scenes from Greek mythology, engineered so the entire floor rose on hydraulic lifts to become a dance surface level with the surrounding teak. A lapis lazuli fireplace dominated the main lounge, and in the bar, known as Ari's Bar, the stools were upholstered in what was reportedly the foreskin of a whale. That detail has circulated for decades and remains a matter of some debate, though Onassis never denied it. A warship that had once carried depth charges now carried champagne. The transformation took 6 years and was, at the time, the most extensive private vessel conversion ever attempted. Aristotle Socrates Onassis was born on the 20th of January, 1906, in Smyrna, the great port city of the Ottoman Empire, known today as Izmir, Turkey. His father, Socrates, was a prosperous tobacco merchant with warehouses along the waterfront. His mother, Penelope, died when Aristotle was 6 years old. His father remarried. The family was Greek Orthodox, part of a large, commercially established Greek community that had conducted trade in Smyrna for centuries, living alongside Turks, Armenians, Jews, and Levantine Europeans in a city that functioned, by most accounts, as one of the most cosmopolitan ports in the eastern Mediterranean. Aristotle attended the Evangelical School of Smyrna, where he studied French, Turkish, English, and commercial bookkeeping alongside the sons of other merchant families. The assumption was that he would inherit his father's business. That assumption lasted until September of 1922. In the final phase of the Greco-Turkish War, Turkish nationalist forces recaptured Smyrna. The Greek and Armenian quarters were set ablaze. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were trapped on the waterfront between the fire and the harbour, waiting for evacuation ships that arrived late and in insufficient numbers. Several of Onassis's relatives were among the dead. 3 uncles, an aunt, her husband, and their daughter reportedly killed when a church in the town of Akakhisar, where 500 Christians had taken shelter, was set on fire. His father was arrested and imprisoned. The family business was seized. The surviving members of the Onassis family fled to Greece, where they lived in an outdoor refugee camp alongside tens of thousands of other displaced Greeks from Asia Minor. In August of 1923, Aristotle Onassis boarded a ship for Buenos Aires using a Nansen passport, a document issued to stateless refugees by the League of Nations, valid for a single journey. He carried, by most accounts, somewhere between $60 and $250. The figure has never been settled, and Onassis told different numbers to different people at different times. He was 17. He arrived with no contacts, no connections, and no return ticket. He reached Buenos Aires on the 21st of September, 1923, during a period when Argentina was one of the wealthiest and fastest-growing economies in the world. His first jobs were manual: dishwasher, bricklayer's assistant, general labourer. He found steadier work as a night-shift telephone operator at the British United River Plate Telephone Company. The pay was modest, but the position gave him something that no other entry-level job in Buenos Aires could have provided. Working the international switchboard at night, Onassis eavesdropped on business calls between London, New York, and Buenos Aires. He learned English by listening. He also learned in real time which commodities were moving, which shipping routes were active, and which deals were being negotiated in confidence. He invested his earliest savings based on intelligence gathered from those lines, small bets, placed quickly, on opportunities that the callers themselves had not yet acted upon. Within 2 years, he had saved enough capital to launch an import business. He began bringing Turkish tobacco into Argentina, lighter, milder blends that appealed particularly to women smokers in a market dominated by heavier Cuban and Brazilian leaf. The bet was cultural as much as commercial. Argentine smoking habits were shifting, and Onassis positioned himself at the leading edge of the change. By 1928, his success was sufficient to draw the attention of the Greek government, which appointed him consul general in Buenos Aires at the age of 22. By 25, he was, by his own account, and by several independent estimates, a millionaire in United States dollars. Where other men his age were still working for weekly wages, Onassis was brokering trade agreements between sovereign nations. Where the established Greek shipping families kept their doors locked to outsiders, Onassis watched freighters arrive and depart from the Buenos Aires docks, and arrived at a conclusion that would define the rest of his life. Tobacco, had a ceiling. Ships did not. The global freight market was in collapse, and in a collapsed market, a man with cash and nerve could buy the world's infrastructure for almost nothing. He intended to do that. In 1932, the year his father died, Onassis made the decision that separated him from every other tobacco trader in South America. He traveled to London, spent 6 months working in the offices of the Draculis brothers, Ithacan shipowners who taught him the fundamentals of maritime commerce, and then went to Montreal. The Canadian National Steamship Company, crippled by the Depression, was liquidating its fleet. 6 freighters of 5,500 gross tonnage each sat idle in the St. Lawrence River, rusting at anchor. They had cost $12 million to build a few years earlier. Onassis bought them. Accounts differ on the price. Some sources cite $20,000 per vessel. Others cite £3,775 each. The total outlay was less than 1% of their construction cost. He named the first 2 after his parents, the Onassis Socrates and the Onassis Penelope. He put only 2 of the 6 into immediate service, holding the remaining 4 in reserve until freight rates recovered. By 1936, rates had risen enough that he ordered his first purpose-built tanker, a 15,000-ton vessel from the Göteborg shipyard in Sweden. The bet was oil. Crude production in the Persian Gulf was accelerating, and every barrel had to cross an ocean. Onassis was among the first to act on it with borrowed money, using long-term charter contracts with oil majors as collateral for loans from the National City Bank of New York. Where traditional shipowners used equity, Onassis used debt. Where they diversified cautiously, he concentrated aggressively. By the end of the Second World War, he had acquired 18 surplus Liberty ships and tankers from the United States Maritime Commission at bargain rates, using shell companies to circumvent citizenship requirements. The arrangement was fraudulent. It was also spectacularly effective. His fleet was no longer a gamble. It was an empire. The Christina was not merely a yacht. She was a diplomatic instrument, a social laboratory, and a floating declaration that Aristotle Onassis answered to no government, no shipping dynasty, and no inherited maritime tradition. The guest lists from the late 1950s read less like party invitations and more like the attendance rolls of an unofficial summit. Winston Churchill sailed on the Christina at least 8 times between 1956 and 1963, occupying the largest suite aboard, outfitted with a private library, an oak-paneled study, and a dedicated steward. Greta Garbo reportedly spent time aboard during the late 1950s, part of a rotating cast of film stars who used the vessel as a floating private retreat. King Farouk of Egypt, 5 years into exile, called Christina the height of opulence, a remark from a man who had once owned a palace with 800 rooms. John F. Kennedy visited before his presidency. The bar aboard the Christina was reportedly the site of his first meeting with Churchill. The guest book contained signatures of royalty, heads of state, and arms dealers, sometimes on the same page. The physical details of the ship, accumulated over the 6-year conversion, defied ordinary plausibility. The main deck swimming pool depicted scenes from the legend of the Minotaur, rendered in thousands of hand-laid mosaic tiles and engineered so that the entire pool floor rose on hydraulic lifts to become a dance floor flush with the surrounding teak. The children's playroom contained a scaled-down replica of Onassis's own office, complete with a miniature desk. The compass deck bar was built from the timbers of a sunken Spanish galleon, the railings wound from salvaged nautical rope, and the stools upholstered in the material Onassis liked to identify, with evident pleasure, as whale foreskin. The grand spiral staircase between decks featured a handrail of onyx and silver. Every bathroom was finished in sienna marble. Every faucet was plated in 24-karat gold. The Christina anchored most often in Monte Carlo, where Onassis had bought controlling stock in the Société de Bons de Mer in 1953 for roughly $1 million. A purchase that gave him effective control over the Monte Carlo casino and, by extension, a share of the principality's revenue. Prince Rainier III was, in a functional sense, his tenant. The ship did not travel so much as she performed, and every performance was a reminder that Aristotle Onassis had built something no amount of inherited wealth could buy. The rivalry between Aristotle Onassis and Stavros Niarchos is one of the strangest competitive relationships in the history of modern wealth. They were brothers-in-law. They were commercial enemies, and they were, in nearly every measurable dimension, mirror images of each other. Onassis married 17-year-old Tina Livanos in 1946. Niarchos responded by marrying her older sister, Eugenia, in 1947. Stavros Livanos, the patriarch, himself one of the foremost Greek shipowners, had 2 daughters and 2 ambitious sons-in-law, and he distributed his daughters as though awarding territorial concessions. Where Onassis built his fleet through bargain acquisitions and debt leverage, Niarchos built his through engineering innovation and technical scale. In 1952, both men commissioned supertankers, each racing to claim the title of the largest privately owned vessel in the world. Niarchos won that particular race, but Onassis won the public. Where Niarchos pursued respectability, assembling one of the finest private art collections in Europe, breeding champion thoroughbreds, maintaining homes in Switzerland and the south of France, Onassis pursued visibility. Where Niarchos cultivated discretion, Onassis cultivated headlines. Their combined fortunes were estimated at $1 billion by the early 1960s, $500 million each, according to the most widely cited contemporary reports. They competed for government contracts in Greece, for oil routes through the Suez Canal, for influence in Monte Carlo, and for the attention of the same international press. Then, on the 4th of May, 1970, the competition entered territory from which neither family would recover. Eugenia Livanos Niarchos was found dead on the family's private island of Spetsopoula. The initial certificate listed the cause as a barbiturate overdose, 25 seconal tablets. A subsequent post-mortem examination revealed bruises and marks of injury on her body. The Piraeus public prosecutor recommended that Niarchos be committed for trial on a charge of fatally injuring his wife. An inquiry ultimately exonerated him. The suspicion, however, never fully dissipated. 18 months later, Niarchos married Tina, Onassis's own former wife, and the dead woman's younger sister. That fact required no commentary. It still does not. On the 20th of January, 1954, a contract was signed in the Saudi Arabian port of Jeddah between the kingdom's finance minister and Aristotle's Socrates Onassis. The agreement, known ever after as the Jeddah Agreement, established the Saudi Arabian Maritime Tanker Company, a joint venture that granted Onassis a 30-year right of priority to transport Saudi crude oil by sea. The scope was extraordinary. Onassis would supply 500,000 tons of tanker shipping to form the nucleus of a Saudi national fleet. The vessels would fly the Saudi flag. They would be exempt from Saudi taxation. And the arrangement would, in practical terms, hand a single private shipowner a strategic chokehold over the maritime transport of the most valuable commodity on Earth. The man who helped broker the deal was Hjalmar Schacht, former president of the Reichsbank, former economic minister under Adolf Hitler, and the architect of Germany's pre-war financial recovery. Schacht had been acquitted of war crimes at Nuremberg in 1946, but was subsequently convicted by a German denazification court and served time. By 1953, he was working for Onassis, who understood that the most effective negotiators were those who had already survived the worst possible tribunals and emerged with their reputations, if not intact, then at least functional. Washington reacted with something approaching strategic alarm. The Dulles brothers, John Foster at the State Department, Allen at the Central Intelligence Agency, viewed the Jeddah Agreement not merely as a commercial contract, but as a challenge to the entire architecture of American control over Middle Eastern petroleum flows. If a private Greek shipowner could monopolize the transport of Saudi oil, the leverage of the major Western oil companies, collectively known as the Seven Sisters, would be permanently diminished. The companies responded by boycotting Onassis's tanker fleet entirely. Aramco, the Arabian-American oil company, launched arbitration proceedings against the government of Saudi Arabia itself, arguing that the agreement violated the exclusive transport provisions of its original concession. The legal and diplomatic pressure was overwhelming. By 1958, the Jeddah Agreement was effectively dead, voided by arbitration and political force. Onassis reportedly paid a settlement of $7 million to resolve the dispute. In today's currency, that would be equivalent to roughly $75 million. It was his most ambitious commercial play. It was also his most public, most consequential defeat. The oil companies never forgave him. And Onassis, for his part, never stopped believing he had been right. On the 22nd of January, 1973, Alexander Onassis boarded a Piaggio P-136 amphibious aircraft at Hellinikon International Airport in Athens. He was 24 years old and had recently been appointed president of Olympic Aviation, the domestic arm of his father's airline. The flight was a routine test. Alexander was aboard, though accounts differ on whether he was piloting. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft banked sharply, struck the ground, and broke apart. Alexander was pulled from the wreckage with catastrophic head injuries. Surgeons in Athens operated for 5 hours. He never regained consciousness. He died the following day, the 23rd of January. Aristotle Onassis flew to Athens immediately. According to those present, he entered the hospital room and stood in silence beside his son's body. He did not weep publicly. He did not speak to the press. He commissioned a private investigation into the crash, which he believed until his own death was an act of sabotage, though no evidence of tampering was ever conclusively established. He never accepted the official finding of pilot error, and never publicly acknowledged it. The death of Alexander broke something in his father that medicine could not name, and time did not repair. Within months, Onassis began showing symptoms of myasthenia gravis, a degenerative neuromuscular disease that causes progressive weakness. His eyelids drooped and eventually required surgical tape to remain open. His speech slurred. His weight declined steadily. His marriage to Jacqueline Kennedy, already strained by mutual indifference and disputes over spending, deteriorated beyond recovery. In October of 1974, Tina, his first wife and the mother of both his children, died at the age of 45 in the Paris mansion she shared with Stavros Niarchos. The official cause was pulmonary edema. Christina suspected otherwise but could prove nothing. Within 29 months, Aristotle Onassis had lost his son, his first wife, and the ability to hold his own eyes open. He died 5 months after Tina, alone in a hospital bed, while the woman he had married watched from across an ocean. Christina Onassis was born on the 11th of December, 1950, in Manhattan. She was raised not by her parents, but by nannies and tutors in France, Greece, and England, at the Headington School in Oxford, then at Queen's College in London. Her parents divorced when she was 10. Her father's affair with Maria Callas, the most celebrated soprano of the 20th century, was the cause, and Christina never forgave Callas. When her father married Jacqueline Kennedy in October of 1968 on the island of Scorpius, Christina refused to use her stepmother's name. She referred to her, according to multiple published accounts, simply as the widow. Where Aristotle Onassis built an empire from nerve, debt, and a switchboard, Christina inherited one she did not seek and could not escape. After Alexander's death, her father reluctantly began grooming her as his successor, a role he had always intended for his son. He sent her to the New York offices. She learned the shipping trade from the inside. She was competent. She was, by several accounts, more financially disciplined than her father. But she never loved the work, and the work never rewarded her with anything resembling freedom. When Aristotle died on the 15th of March 1975, Christina received 55% of the estate, then valued at roughly $500 million. The remaining 45% funded the Alexander S. Onassis Public Benefit Foundation, established in her brother's memory. After legal negotiations, Jacqueline Kennedy received a settlement of $26 million in exchange for not contesting the will. Where Aristotle married twice, Christina married 4 times. Joseph Bolker, a Los Angeles real estate developer, in 1971 that lasted 9 months. Alexandros Andreidis, a Greek banking and shipping heir, in 1975, 14 months. Sergei Kauzov, a Soviet shipping agent, in 1978, she reportedly left him after 4 days, though the divorce took over a year. Thierry Roussel, a French pharmaceutical heir, in 1984, he fathered her only child, Athena, then fathered another child with his Swedish mistress during the marriage. Where her father had pursued power across oceans, Christina pursued love across continents. Neither found what they were searching for. On the 19th of November, 1988, Christina's maid found her body in the bathtub of a friend's mansion in Tortuguitas, outside Buenos Aires. The autopsy attributed her death to acute pulmonary edema. She was 37. The fortune survived her. The family did not. The Christina O sits today in Mediterranean waters, listed for sale at €52 million after a reduction from 90 million. She is 325 feet long, refurbished twice since Onassis died, once in 2001 for $50 million, and again through 2015 and 2017. Ari's bar is still intact. The rope-wound galleon timbers, the whale skin stools, the spiral staircase with its onyx handrail. Guests pay hundreds of thousands of euros per week to sleep where Churchill slept and drink where Callas wept. You can walk the teak decks of the Christina O on a summer afternoon and hear nothing but water against the hull. The same deck where Onassis danced with Jackie at their wedding reception. The same stern rail where Maria Callas stood the night she understood she had been replaced. The same pool that once rose to become a dance floor while heads of state watched from rattan chairs. Scorpios, the private island in the Ionian Sea, holds 3 graves: Aristotle, Alexander, and Christina, all within 40 meters of each other on the hillside, overlooking the water that made the family's fortune. Had Christina kept a single undiversified position in her father's tanker operations through the oil booms of the late 1970s and 80s, the Onassis name would have remained among the wealthiest shipping dynasties in the world. She did not. She sold interests, paid settlements, funded the foundation, married 4 men, and gave portions of the estate away. She died in Argentina, in the same country where her father had arrived 65 years earlier with nothing in his pockets and a one-way refugee passport. Athena Onassis Roussel, Christina's only child, was 3 years old when her mother died. She was raised in Switzerland by her father, Thierry Roussel, and his second wife, the same woman he had been seeing throughout the marriage. She inherited the Onassis fortune. She makes rare public appearances. She competed briefly as an equestrian. She has given almost no interviews. Where Aristotle built an empire from a switchboard and a Nansen passport, and where Christina tried to hold it together with 4 marriages and a checkbook, Athena simply walked away. The money survived. The foundation still operates. The family did not. Where Aristotle sought power, he found isolation. Where Christina sought love, she found repetition. Where Athena might have sought either, she chose silence, and silence, it turned out, was the only strategy that worked. The ship outlasted them all. Was Christina Onassis doomed the moment she inherited her father's empire, or was there a version of this story where she survives it? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe